We will start our webinar with land acknowledgements. We're thankful to be able to join you from the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. Our agenda today, we will have presentations from Karen and Justine from Wellington County, and then we will have a Q&A session after their presentations. So before I invite Karen and Justine, I'd like to say that this webinar is the first webinar in our Climate and Agriculture series. We would like to start a conversation among our network, explore how farmers can advance climate opportunities and how municipal governments can help farmers advance climate opportunities and the gaps that exist and the solutions to these gaps. Here's a short video that forms the basis of why this matters.
Canada is a major agricultural powerhouse, without any question. We regularly are in the top 10 global food exporting countries in the world. When I was a kid, spending summers on my grandfather's farm in Niagara, my grandfather would drive slowly through the fields and I would stand on the back of the tractor, and my job was to throw fertilizer onto the field, small pellets of nitrogen, potassium, or phosphorus. About 50% of that fertilizer was wasted. It didn't land at the right place at the right time for the plant to use, and as a result, it either worked its way into the water table and ended up polluting Lake Erie, or it ended up getting into the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas. That's the old style of farming. As we think of the romantic past of farming that was very labor intensive, bound families together, involved vibrant rural communities, we also have to acknowledge that we are moving forward into a different age and that we need to be developing technologies that allow us to maximize the production while minimizing the environmental impact. And in this regard, I think Canada can play a key role. Globally, agriculture causes approximately 1/3 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture is the world's largest user of fresh water and the biggest polluter of water. And ag food sector is also the biggest driver in the global loss of biodiversity. Now, I have to be honest, I love dairy products. I love beef, I love chicken, I love pork. The production of those products costs a lot of energy. And so my prediction is that we in the future will be eating less but better quality meat. And at the same time, we will be finding other sources of protein in our diets. Aquaculture is an obvious one. I think we'll be eating a lot more farm salmon in the future. But I also think we'll be eating insect protein, algae-based protein, fungus-based protein, and of course, vegetable-based protein like soybean products and legumes and things like that. I think Canada can produce more safe, high-quality, sustainable food. And in this way, we can become the world's trusted supplier, which is both a wonderful challenge and a huge opportunity, and is a place where Canadians in general can play a global leadership role. According to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, in terms of exports, non-durum wheat is our #1 export, closely followed by canola. And our canola industry in Canada is extremely sophisticated. Today, there's approximately 20 million acres of land planted to canola. This means we produce about 18 million tons of canola products every year. So Canada is an absolute leader in global food production. We are at the cutting edge of developing new genetics, both for plants and for livestock. We're also very advanced at developing new farm management tools such as sensors, so soil sensors, moisture sensors, linking data that comes off of a tractor with satellite data, climate data, and robotics. So we are really at the vanguard of what some people call the new agricultural revolution. So this sounds wonderful, and I think from an environmental perspective, the farm of the future will be better for the environment than the farm of the past.
I will pass it over to Justine, and we look forward to your presentation.
So yes, my name is Justine Dainard. I am the project manager for the Smart Cities office at the County of Wellington, and we'll explain in a few moments exactly what the Smart Cities office does and the project that they're working on. But first, I would like to introduce Karen Chisholme.
Hi, I'm Karen Chisholme. I am the Climate Change and Sustainability Manager at the County of Wellington. And I'm going to lead off our presentation today. Today, this is our overview. It's kind of just a general guide more for when you get these slides in real time or at the end of the presentation. So we'll just go through a bit of background, our scope of work, existing programs, the municipal role, which I think everyone's most curious about, and then our experimental acres is the project that Justine alluded to a little bit, and some of the lessons learned so far. So a bit of our background, Wellington County is predominantly agricultural. You can see there on the left as a bit of a map. We surround the city of Guelph, and then these small gray blobs are townships and towns, the settlement areas, and the rest is agriculture. So agriculture is our third largest employer, and it's a focus area in the county's 3-year economic development plan. We've calculated our agriculture emissions, and we're at about 522,000 tons of equivalent carbon dioxide, and that's from 2016 data. And you can see the breakdown there for enteric fermentation, which is cow gas, cow burps, and manure management, soil management, and liming and urea. So this is going to be really a story of how this all started and where we're going. So in 2019, I was hired as climate change coordinator under the Municipal Climate something or other protection partnership grant from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And that grant was really to create a mitigation plan for the County of Wellington. And the time frame was about 2 years. And at the same time, we, the County of Wellington, in partnership with City of Guelph, received a grant from the federal government, the $10 million Smart City grant. And that was really to create Canada's first circular food economy. And that time frame is about 4 years. So we'll jump back to our climate change mitigation plan and the scope of work. So as most municipal climate change mitigation plans, we focused on buildings, transportation, solid waste, and agriculture. And under the agriculture umbrella, we looked at methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. And we did this by following the IPCC protocol and largely used Statistics Canada data. And the things that we were looking at calculating specifically were emissions from manure management, emissions from soil management, lime and urea application, biomass burning, and carbon sequestration.
So where our food future comes in is that it has 3 overarching goals, and these are they: a 50% increase in access to affordable, nutritious food, 50 new circular food businesses. Those are businesses that are adopting newly circular practices, which I'll explain in a moment, and a 50% increase in unlocking the value of waste. And I'll have a diagram in a moment to explain more about that as well. So those are my project's goals. But Karen and I saw that as we compared our 2 plans, we had a lot in common. So for the circular economy goals, part of doing a circular economy is to deliberately design out waste and pollution at a systemic level. And that ties in perfectly with not having as many emissions on farms. It plans to keep products and materials in use. So you're using the lives of the plants and the animals in the soil. And it focuses on regenerative and natural systems. So can we take materials from systems that can regenerate themselves? And those are the focuses of a circular economy. So we found a lot of common ground. And just to explain quickly, a linear economy, which is what you see here, is something that draws out natural resources, takes them, makes something out of them, and really doesn't have a plan to do anything other than waste it. It creates a lot of waste at the end of its life cycle. What a circular economy does is it shrinks the reliance on natural resources. It creates new loops so that you're reusing things in different ways. You still are recycling, but you're also upcycling, you're remanufacturing, you're planning on longer uses, repairability, intensified uses, dematerialization, which is, can you provide a service instead of a disposable product? And all of that means that you result with, the end goal is less waste. You're taking less and you're wasting less, and you're using more in new ways. So that's the circular economy, and how does that fit in with regenerative agriculture? Well, regen ag is a really big banner, and it encompasses a lot, and it doesn't have one close definition. It's a suite of ongoing practices, but essentially it boils down to don't disturb the soil, keep it covered, keep living roots in the soil, keep it as diverse as possible, and bring the animal life cycles back into the land directly. So when we looked at these regenerative agricultural practices, which fit within the circular economy principles as well, we articulate them in these particular ways, in these action items. The cover crops, the mob grazing, watching the nutrient management, that is not over applying, just as Evan Fraser was saying, and also including things like tree planting, biodiversity, and pollination support in ways like along the edges of your fields if you're not integrating them fully like silvopasture. It is very much a continuum of practices. It's normal to never stop tinkering, never to stop adding on a new regenerative practice or reevaluating and shifting it slightly to intensify it. It's very tempting to look for a prescription, but that doesn't really exist because the soil itself is a live entity and it will depend on the history of your field, the practices that are currently happening, what you're planning to add in future, the kind of geomorphology that you have. It's very much a living document and it will respond differently to different practices. So you have to be very much involved in it. The lovely story is that even if you can't prescribe a specific practice and expect a specific outcome, there are so many co-benefits that are seen early on. Long before you see results in your soil samples, you'll see that all of a sudden your field is able to withstand heavier rainstorms, or you're seeing some more worm life. So these co-benefits come back earlier than the scientifically provable benefits.
So from here, we've kind of identified that Justine's program and my program have these shared goals. We've found a framework that we think is going to be helpful. And so the next question is, how do we apply the framework? So we went through, there are a lot of programs. Since we developed these charts in front of you, more federal funding has come down to create more programs, all with similar goals, all working towards the same goal of carbon sequestration and resiliency in our farmlands. These charts were done a few months back, but we went through and said, what's out there, who's playing in this space, what are they doing, where are their focuses, and that really allowed us to figure out where we may fit in and where are the gaps. So here we have a couple of programs that are run locally here. We have a rural water quality program, which is somewhat unique in Southern Ontario. The Grand River has, I think, almost complete coverage of rural water quality programs. They're delivered through the conservation authorities. Peel Region also has rural water quality program and also delivered through the conservation authorities, and there's likely others. The Wellington County also has a Green Legacy tree planting program. There is the on-farm program, which is delivered through Soil and Crop, Ontario Soil and Crop, Living Labs. There is an existing Living Labs, which covers, we have some Wellington farmers participating in the existing Living Labs, but there's a new Living Labs funding grant out there that we hope that we'll have more participation locally as well, and it's focused specifically on climate change. And then we have the Canadian Agriculture Partnership, which again, provides funding for similar practices. So what we really felt was missing is, how do you get started? Rural water quality has a lot of big picture or big area applications, but what about that farmer who is really very risk averse? How did they get started? They're curious but not committed. How do they get started? And then the other spot that we found may be a gap is, how do you move from a project to a practice? And so many of these programs, it's one and done. You get funding, you don't qualify for another year. So how do we get farmers to continue to grow and continue to try out new practices? As Justine said, this is something that you can come back to and tweak and apply something new and stack some of these practices to get greater outcomes. So those are two areas where we saw there may be some opportunity. So then we have to sit back and say, what is the municipal role? So Wellington County has long been a supporter of the Rural Water Quality Program. It's a for Wellington County, it's completely funded through the county, and same with the Green Legacy Tree Planting Program. So those are big sort of flagship programs for us, and we're very fortunate to have them, but not all municipalities have those programs. So there is some language. I've just listed a few from the provincial policy statement, and there's other legislation that speaks to things like protecting agriculture lands, either from land use or here we have stormwater management. So there's different ways. I think there's different entry points where you can look at climate change and agriculture in the existing legislation. But I think mostly the municipality's role is to support our residents and businesses.
So what did we do? After consulting with our local heroes who were already active in this area and understood the full picture, we decided what we could do is a pilot. We called it the Experimental Acres, inspired by Mark Eastman from the Credit Valley Conservation Authority. So we wanted to try to find that early adoption thing that you saw on the continuum arrow. And we wanted to be able to turn a farmer's curiosity into their courage. So how do we give them the confidence to move forward in their practices? So we thought with this pilot, we'll focus on a practice that the farmer thinks could work on their farm. It's very specific to their operation, their land, their livestock. That's where it has to begin. We'll provide a small amount of funding to cover their risk, their expenses, their time, so that they have a bit of a backstop. You know, if it goes terribly wrong, they won't be out of pocket. We'll offer assistance in drafting the plan to evaluate the success. So we want to leave them with a sort of a rough business case of how much it cost and whether there were benefits. And we want to include farm visits so that we can help with gathering the data and capturing the metrics. We have a few objectives. We wanted to figure out what the barriers are for farmers to start to shift the practices, where there are gaps in knowledge and where we need to help share knowledge, do more of the KTT, the knowledge transfer. How do we measure? We still don't have a solid benchmark out there that you can just pick up and go. There's no prescription, as I said earlier. So for that particular farm, we have to figure out what the appropriate measurement is. How are we going to collect the data and record it? And then, as we were saying, what is the role for municipalities? So we're fortunate in that in this early pilot year, we've partnered with Dufferin County as well, so that they can kind of watch us from arm's length and make sure that what's working for our farmers also works for the Dufferin County farmers, and that the system is something that they could pick up and scale up if they chose to. So we have that outsider view engaged from the beginning so that we can figure out whether the municipal role is appropriate. So here's what we're planning on measuring and tracking this year, and this is what we felt we could take on. Basic soil testing, and we will send things off to the lab and we will get these measurements back. And we will also be making sure that we're testing not only the active patch, the small patch that's being changed this year, but also an historic patch that may not have a lot of disturbance over its lifetime. So the headlands edge row area is a forest at the edge of a field, so that we understand the historic organic matter counts and things to compare to. We'll do a soil health assessment that is observational, so digging in hands-on, literally, to look at how the water infiltrates through, what the compaction levels are, what the biodiversity signs of life are for insects, that kind of things. Understanding the soil with our own eyes, and passing those skills on to farmers who may not have actually approached their farm that way in past. Many do, but some don't. And photo documentation, we want to have stories from the field emerging. And also ask for some farmer journal in the sense of filling out surveys so we understand their expectations and trepidations at the beginning, and then at the end, and any other comments they want to offer along the way, we'll try to capture. So we were lucky enough that we also had some of the Aerial Food Institute scholars working with us over this academic year. They spent several months with us, meeting with some of our local experts and our farmers, and trying to draft a sample handbook and program evaluation tool. So they were able to put some structure in there for us. we have a plan for collecting data and tracking what's going on. We have a plan to collect the farmers' reports from the field and some of the photo documentation as well, so that we can even anecdotally build up some of these things.
So to kind of recap how we've approached this and the opportunities that we saw, opportunity was one is really just aligning the goals across departments. And I think this is really important to see what other departments' interests are and what programs they may be thinking of or in development or even existing. Aligning the goals just gives more power to the program you're creating. Opportunity number 2 is using existing frameworks. This is not, there's a lot of information out there and we don't really need to recreate the wheel. It's more of a how do we apply that information in a new way to gain more uptake. Opportunity 3 is, of course, find the gaps in existing programs. We're very fortunate in Wellington to have a lot of existing programs and a lot of uptake in those programs. So it's a great jumping off point for us, but not every municipality is going to have that. So you may have quite a lot bigger gaps than we do. But the small gaps are sometimes hard to find, and then figuring out, this is part of our pilot, is figuring out the value that filling those gaps really brings. And opportunity 4 is creating programs that align with a greater body of work. So at the end of the day, we're all working on this together, and the work that we're doing, the things that we've already learned is helpful information. We have living labs coming kind of down the pipe, and there'll be an application for that with partnership across multiple organizations. And so the stuff that we're learning here can definitely be applied to that application and other things. So we want to make sure that the things that we're building are able to feed into those other initiatives. And so our lessons learned so far, these are just a few. I feel like every day, Justine and I will meet at the end of the day and we'll be like, I didn't know that. There's so much happening in this space. So lots of lessons learned. Regenerative agriculture is continuous practice, as Justine had mentioned, first and foremost. Another thing is we learned quite early is measuring profit and not yield. So when it comes to regenerative agriculture, there's a lot of practices, things like reducing the number of trips along your field are going to reduce your compaction. So that means you don't have as much wear and tear on your machines. It means you're not using as much fuel to run those machines. So and also reducing nitrogen application. So the yield may actually go down with some of these practices, but your profit may go up because you're not putting in as many inputs. So those are really important, as an important distinction for measurement. It's not just yield, you really have to look at the profit side too. Also looking at a lot of the co-benefits. So if you're creating a pollinator habitat, then that's going to benefit your fields and your crops. Farming is very personal, and so we don't want to come at this as strictly scientific and ram ideas down the farmers' throats and say you have to do this and you're not a good farmer if you don't. I mean, really, there is a lot of social capital in farming, and a lot of these farms are passed down generational. There's a lot of social component to farming, and it's something that we need to be aware of right from the beginning, that farming is quite personal. It's a livelihood, it's a lifestyle, it's all sorts of things. So that just leads to science doesn't sell. Social science sells. The science, it's been proven and everyone understands the science, but picking up and practicing that science, that's a social science conversation, not a science conversation. And next is don't be annoying. Farmers are very busy. This is one of our very early lessons learned, is farmers are so busy. There are windows where they are more accessible to participate in certain activities or provide input, just even get them to answer an email. It is not out of the realm of the possibility for a farmer to take 2-3 weeks to reply to an email. We are looking at hosting another soil conference. We just had one last month. We're looking at another one. We're trying to figure out the timing, and we were advised the next opportunity would be when the wheat comes off. And I said, well, when is that? And they said, sometime in August, probably. So it really is, they're very tied to, particularly in their cropping, very tied to that. And we need to be aware of that and just understand that, not to be annoying. Gather the local experts. We've had so many wonderful conversations with our local experts and learning from them. There are so many players in this to make it valuable. They have long histories of working not just locally but in the industry and making relationships and contacts, and they are honestly like gold. And then find cheerleaders. There's been times where Justine and I are like, are we doing the right thing? And then we'll have a conversation, and some of the folks who have been in the field for a long time, they've come out and said, we're so excited about this, and you're on the right track, and really providing that valuable input and kind of selling what we're doing for us, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So finding cheerleaders is really, really important. And just to wrap up, here are some of the folks who have helped us. Mel Lymas from Headlands Ag Enviro has been a wonderful contributor and asset to developing this program and continues to be. Janet Harrop from Wellington Federation of Agriculture has just, her perspectives on livestock and just farming in general has been just amazing. Mark Eastman and Tracy Bryan have been incredible. And I'm sorry, Tracy, it says GRCA, and Tracy is now at Ontario Soil and Crop. And Chris Meyer from A&L Labs. We've spoken to A&L Labs about soil testing, and he's given us some valuable information and insight on that. And then, of course, the Aero Food Institute's students that contributed to our handbook. They worked really hard for us, and it was just a pleasure to work with them on this project. And that's us if you want to contact us.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll stop sharing my screen in a moment, and we're happy to answer questions.